Do you have a sensitive child? Do you have a child who feels things deeply? And do your children are your children under multiple caregivers? Or is it that it's just the transition from you watching them to giving them to their father or their mother, that separation, that transition, it's hard? Then on this episode, I'm going to share with you the four steps to make transitions between caregivers a lot smoother. If you have a highly sensitive child or a neurodivergent child like I do, or if just your children are just struggling to go from you to the babysitter, back to the house, from you to daddy, from daddy to you, then this episode is for you. Hello, my name is Marcela Collier. I am your host of the Parenting with Understanding podcast. And I wanted to come and talk about that because in my private community, the Secure Parent Collective, that has came up a lot. My child has a really hard time when I drop him off at daycare or when I drop him off at preschool. Our children's teacher, they're a caregiver. If you're not right there during their school hours, then yes, they are transitioning from caregiver to caregiver. Or I drop them off with their nanny, or when I'm about to leave them with their nanny, it's hard. Or their transition back to the house after spending 2 days in daddy's house, it's tough. Those are the kind of transitions that we are going to talk today. And I have four steps. Number one, let's understand the why it could be so hard on sensitive children to have these transitions. So there are two abilities or two skills that are necessary for you to transition smoothly from one thing to the other. Number one, your ability to manage your anxiety. In this case, it could be separation anxiety or anticipation anxiety as well. So, number one, your ability to manage your emotions, your anxiety. And number two, your ability to understand time. I understand that in 2 days, I'm going to see you again. Or I understand that at the end of the day, I'm going to see you again. I understand that in 2 hours, you're going to come back. Why is it important to know this? Because these two skills are higher level skills that little children struggle with. Regardless if you have an autistic child or a child with sensory needs or a sensitive child or just a strong-willed child, or if your children in general, especially if they are 5 and under, they don't have a concept of time yet. And if your children are children, if they're not adults, their brains are undeveloped to manage the stress that comes with separation. Because when they are in between caregivers, there is a separation. There is a reunification with one of them and a separation from the other. And this could get confusing. This could get really, for some children, even nerve wracking if they don't have a strong connection with the caregiver that they're going to. For example, if it's their first week of daycare, if they change teachers, a lot of our, not a lot, but quite a few of our members of our private community, since my child changed teachers at daycare, it's been rough to drop them off. It makes sense. It makes sense if there is not a strong connection with the caregiver, because for children, it's of their survival to know that the caregiver they're under is a caregiver, is a person that they can trust, and is a person fully capable to hold them, not just physically, but emotionally as well. And if they're just getting to know the teacher, it's understandable why they are having such a hard time, because it could get really scary to not know if that person is emotionally available when they need it. Okay, so now that we know why this could be hard, that it's not that you're doing something wrong, it's understandable that little kids have a hard time transitioning from a caregiver to the other. Let's talk about how to prepare them, or how to live with them those transitions in a less smoother way. So number one, preparing them for transitions. I think that's step number two, because the first step was to understand the transition itself, why it's hard. Number two, preparing for this transition. And I want to stop here for a second, because a lot of the times, as parents, we're very focused on how do I make the transition smoother, when in order for us to make the moment of the transition smoother, is very important what we do before the transition, to prepare our children, to prepare the environment, to create that level of safety that children need to say, hey, I know that this caregiver that I'm going to is fully equipped physically and emotionally to hold me. And number two, the time, because they cannot tell time. How can we prepare children to have certainty about the time? Because even though they may have a strong connection with their father, and their father is a safe person, they might not have a grasp of how much is 2 days that I'm going to see mommy again. And that could create a lot of separation anxiety, even if they have a strong connection with the caregiver at the moment. So, number one, prepare them with visual aids. I love this when it comes to children under 12, or children in general, even teenagers. So they are able to see clearly when when they're going to have reunification with the other caregiver, or when they're going to see or start with the other caregiver. Example, when my parents were about to come from Colombia, and by the way, they're not the twins caregivers, but it was going to be a reunification. It was going to be a change, a transition, because they were going to stay in our house for a month. So what did I do with my twins? One of them, who is highly sensitive child and who struggles with transitions, we created together this big paper chain, and every ring of the chain was a day. So every day they took off one of the rings, and when they were in one ring, that was the day that my parents were coming. What was the purpose of this activity? So for them to have a clear grasp and expectation of when Papito and Mamita were going to come. That reduced so much anxiety in my highly sensitive child. And he was not asking as much as he would have asked me every single day. When are they coming? Where are they coming? Is it now? Is it tomorrow? Is it later? Is it when I go to sleep? Is it when is it? It prevented that, because he was able to clearly see the timeline in a way that he understood. Number two is communicating next steps. Communicating next steps each step of the way. I have experience, besides my son, caring for highly sensitive kids, because I did therapeutic foster care for many, many years, for 10 years. So, what is therapeutic foster care? Therapeutic care is foster care with therapeutic accommodations for children who have high needs. So the kids that I care for, they were either neurodivergent, or they had a history of PTSD, or they just were very sensitive children. They needed to live in a therapeutic environment. So they lived with people like me, who are therapeutic providers. So I do have experience with this. And when it came to them, explaining to them each step of the things that you're doing created so much certainty, especially during the times that it was going to be the day they were going to see their bio family. It's because that change in caregivers creates a big turmoil in a sensitive child's soul, in their heart. So that day, I made sure that I would say, over explaining myself in everything we did. I remember waking up and then going to the kitchen table, and as they were eating breakfast, or maybe after breakfast, sitting down with them and saying, "Hey, so today you are going to see your parents, and this is going to happen. We are going to shower, we're going to do this, we're going to eat lunch, then we're going to meet your parents in your parents' house. You are going to visit them for about 3 hours or four, and then we are going to the store, and then from the store, we're going to come back home. Any questions?" That helps so much. And I prevented so many meltdowns if I would have taken it a little more a little more loosely. Today you're gonna visit your parents, and then so what? And then I would risk myself, or I would not call it a risk. I think that was a bad word choice, but I would be more exposed and expose them to have bigger meltdowns, and to have a really bad experience during that transition. Number three, creating smooth transitions with caregivers. So how can we already talked about the understanding why it's hard, what to do beforehand. Now let's talk about the transition itself. So the transition itself, I like to take it as a transition, not as a disruption. So let me tell you what the difference might be between them two. So a transition could be that, no, let's talk about a disruption first. A disruption might look like, okay, here is Johnny, and then I give it to the dad or the mom, and then bye, Johnny, see you later. That's a disruption. Okay, what happened here? A transition is slowly kind of like helping Johnny moving to being comfortable with the new caregiver, and then I'm stepping away. It's not about lingering. It's not about us anxiously attaching to them, and I'm not gonna let you go, baby. I'm gonna, because that creates more anxiety. It's about them having the opportunity to explore the new environment, and this works excellent when it comes to daycares and preschools. If children, if you were allowed, I don't know if you are, if you were allowed to hang for a little bit so they can explore the environment, they can meet the teacher, they can like acclimate to the vibe of the room and the teacher's vibe as well, and then you say your goodbyes. Now, would this prevent them from crying when you do say your goodbyes? Probably not, because it is stressful for kids to say bye to their caregivers, even if they feel very comfortable in the environment. But it is not an experience that they will feel abandoned and abandoned and unsafe, and like I was just dropped off here and then bye. So if it's possible, I like to just have them explore the environment. I remember when I took my twins to church, not anymore because they're almost 9 years old, but when they were little itty bitties, I remember telling them, "Hey, I'm going to hang by the door, you know, by the side. I'm not disruptive of all the other parents dropping the kids off. I'm going to hang around here for a little bit. If you need me, you can wave goodbye." And I remember the twins waving goodbye every 30 seconds, and then me fading away. That helps them. Okay, mommy's still here. I'm going to explore the environment because my primary caregiver is here. So create a smooth transition. My recommendation is to not have this to be a disruptive. The I'm here to drop you off and bye, but just as a way of us smoothly acclimating our children to the other environment and to the other caregivers as much as we can. I know I was giving this same training to the members of my private community, and one of the members was shaking her head, kind of like that would not happen with my ex. And she's a private coaching client, and I understand her story. And yes, for some families that might not be possible because the other caregiver is not is not supportive, doesn't understand, doesn't take in consideration your input, or gets defensive when you do things like that. So I know this might not be applicable for every situation or for every family. Now, it will be worth to have a previous conversation with that caregiver, even if you, in your mind, you think, they're not going to take it well. Well, at least take the chance. And even if they don't take it well, they will know what you think, and they will know what's best for their children. And it's on them if they want to take you up on that or not. Or you can create support systems around the situation. So if dropping your son off in at your ex's house it's tough, then think about, like, okay, so what can I do, or what can it happen so things are as safe for my children as possible. For example, one of my children in foster care, I did that assessment, and then as a team, I wasn't the only one caring for the child. We were a team of professionals. As a team, we decided that this child needed to have a supervised family meeting instead of unsupervised, just because of the things that were happening there, and the way the child was taking, not having supervision, outside supervision, and being alone with his parents. So that might be your case. That might be your case. Mm, when this might be, I want to confess here, I'm a lawyer. So as a lawyer, I know that you could request supervised visions if you are in the middle of a custody thing or not, but don't take this as legal advice for sure. If you need legal advice, seek it from your lawyer. Hire a lawyer and then ask them if that could be possible in your particular situation and in your particular state. If you see that your children's safety or emotional well being is compromised with those transitions. Okay, so number three, creating smooth transitions with caregivers. The other thing is, part of creating this smooth transition, I like to use comfort items or comfort objects. So, comfort objects are things that remind children of you. What could remind your children of you during the separation? So, it could be a Leo bracelet. I used to do that. Back in the day when I did foster care, I didn't have the twins, but there was a time that I needed to go back to Colombia for about a month, and my foster son needed to stay here with my husband. And he was having a hard time. He was having a hard time. So we created these bracelets together, and then he kept some, I kept some. I kept the ones that had his initials, and he kept the ones that had my initials. And that was kind of the physical sign that let him know, even through the separation, we are connected. Through the separation, I'm thinking about you, and I have something of you, something from you that is important to you, that has your initials. Same way from him. It made it a lot easier. And when I came back from Colombia, the first thing that he showed me was the bracelets. He said, "Hey, look, mom, I still have them on." So it did help them so much. It could be a special teddy bear, it could be a special blanket. If you are in the middle of a developmental transition, such as your children getting used to Not co-sleeping, not bed sharing, but sleeping in on bed. Maybe having them use one of your blankets or one of your comforters or one of your pillowcases that smell like you. I know that sounds gross, but it is that comfort item that reminds them of the connection that they have with you. Before the transition, use connection. Use a lot of connection. My husband is great at that. Before he leaves every single day to work, he eats breakfast. And then by the time he's done with breakfast, the twins are already awake. The twins are usually in the couch. He goes there and he cuddles them and then he squeezes them. He hugs them for a little bit. Sometimes it's 5 minutes. Sometimes when he doesn't have so much time, it is 30 seconds. But that goes such a long way when it comes to the child feeling, even if my parent is leaving me, I'm connected to them and I'm loved by them. Because let's face it, as adults have the awareness that, yeah, dad is leaving because he has to work, he has to provide food for this house. If we explain that logic to a 3-year old, they don't have that understanding. They just see daddy leaving, they just see mommy leaving, they just see their caregiver disappearing. Even if we explain the reasons, they don't quite grasp the, okay, but what does that mean that he has to go work and make money? Like, that's a very non-tangible concept that they don't get yet. So showing them physical signs of connection and explaining to them as well what you're going to do, even if it goes over their head, helps them feel a lot more assured, and it does help with that anxiety through the transition out of a caregiver. So let's move on to the next step: how to manage that anxiety. The first thing that I have to say is that your children cannot be calmer than you. They cannot be. They could be more dysregulated than you are. They could be more upset than you are. They could feel more anxious than you are. But children can never be calmer than you are because they depend on you to regulate. Why am I saying this? Because if we are anxious, if we are dysregulated, if we are transmitting that anxious energy to our children, that's what they're going to receive. And I'm preaching here to myself because I have a default preoccupied attachment style. So, what is a preoccupied attachment style? It comes from an anxious attachment style. The separation for me is really hard. This usually happens when we grew up in inconsistent caregiver environments. My parents, they have my brother, he has Down syndrome, autism, he has many things going on. And growing up, he had a lot of long hospital stays. So I bounced from caregiver to caregiver. Most of the time, it was my mom and dad. But a lot of the times, and for long stretches of time, I'm saying sometimes for months, I was under my tia's care. I was under my tia in law's care, like my mom's sister in law's care. And this created this anxious attachment. It's not a fault of my parents, it was just the circumstances. One of our clients, she's in a military family, and her child is developing this anxious attachment. And then it is not a fault on the mom or anything, it's just the lifestyle. So because I do have this inconsistency, I had this inconsistency in caregivers. I did not know who's gonna watch me. I did not know who I was gonna wake up to, because many times I went to sleep with my mom and then I woke up and it was my tia bringing the breakfast to me. Then separation is hard for me. So, how does that show in my parenting right now? I've been working very hard and I've improved so much. But when I was before I worked hard, I used to really show my worrisome, really show my anxiety in a way that did not look that I had a healthy processing of my anxiety. It was more like it was more like a projection of lack of safety to my children. And this created a really anxious energy with them as well. Really anxious energy. So, how do we manage separation anxiety? That's the first and biggest one. If our children deal with a lot of separation anxiety, let's check what is our level of anxiety that we are transmitting to them. And if yes, how can we lean into that anxiety and process it in a way that does not that we don't transfer it as an unsafe thing, because it's not about the feeling of anxiety itself. It's how we are dealing with it, and how we are showing it, how we are managing it. We do this in coaching all the time, and you know what, the patterns that we don't work through, we are doomed to repeat them even if we don't want to. Just having the desire of raising our children peacefully and differently from the way we were raised is not enough to raise our children differently, because our old patterns are always going to visit us if we don't have a clear awareness on how to show up in a different way. So once I was under parenting coaching and therapy, the difference between them two is that therapy allowed me to heal many parts of me, and parenting coaching allowed me to not pass to my children a lot of my wounds. Once I worked through those patterns, I started seeing that my children were a lot more relaxed through transitions from caregiver to caregiver. I started seeing that when daddy left home, they were not as anxious because they used to get into sibling fights and hitting each other, and all that comes down to the separation anxiety. I started seeing that they transitioned back to daddy a lot easier. And the only thing that changed was how I showed up during those moments after the hard work that I did in coaching and in therapy. So if you are like Marcela, I want to raise my children differently. I don't want to pass this anxiety down to them. My invitation for you is to work on recognizing your pattern so you can break free from it, so you can raise an emotionally healthy child. I have a great resource that can help you with that. It's in my free class that you can find at hicparenting.com, or you can find it here in the description below. You open the description of the podcast episode, whether it's YouTube, it's in the description of the video. If you are listening from your podcast provider, just open the the description and then you can see the link there. In that class, I'm going to share with you the system that helped me break free from my toxic reactions and start raising emotionally healthy children. And it's the same system that I use in coaching to help my coaching clients who, by the way, are highly sensitive parents or who are raising highly sensitive children, neurodivergent children, children on the spectrum, children with ADHD, children with trauma. That's our bread and butter. That's the type of parents we help. This system has helped them as well bring peace to their parenting, and start raising emotionally healthy children. I have a question for you. What can you do now to manage your anxiety? The first thing that comes to your head, please drop it in the comments. Comment it if you are watching us from YouTube. If you enjoy this podcast episode, would you give us a positive review? Just open the description and let us know how this podcast helped you and how it could help more parents. If it is a 5-star positive review, I would love it because it helps us get to more parents who are highly sensitive or who are raising highly sensitive children. And then the last thing is, if you enjoyed this episode, if it gave you strategies and, more importantly, insight about your children's separation anxiety, then share it with a friend. Click the share button, text it to a friend right now before you forget, like me. Many times I'm like, I'm going to do this and I don't do it, not because I don't want to, but because I forget. I have an ADHD brain. Text it to a friend and say, hey, this podcast episode helped me so much understand my children, how to transition them smoothly, and how to ease their separation anxiety. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you so much for coming to this episode with me. And remember, it only takes understanding of yourself and of your children's needs to transform your parenting. That's Parenting with Understanding. I'll see you next time.